All right, Mike, what's going on?
Hey, man. Glad we finally got together. Sorry, I delayed a little bit there. I appreciate you sticking with me.
All good. Both very busy, both family men, both have jobs, so completely understand. So we'll go ahead and introduce each other. So I'll lead it off with introducing myself. So for your audience who may not know who I am, my name is Devin Rushing. YouTube name Scud Runner. Uh, I am well into my aviation career about a year after flight school. So obviously we connected with one another because we both have flight school / aviation channels in Army flight school. So a little bit of background on prior service, medical service, commissioned officer. I did medical service corps in the ground part of the Army for a while, managing ambulance exchange points, casualty collection points, medical operations for a battalion at the tactical level. And then I later applied to become a 67 Juliet or an Aero Medical Evacuation Officer, and went to flight school and went through flight school. And now I'm about a year out of flight school. So that is a quick rundown of me. So Mike, what about
Yeah,
you?
for anybody who's new, I'm Mike Merritt. My channel name is Meritorious. It's kind of a joke, but it's also I did win some boards and all that stuff, and I can be a bit of a try hard sometimes. But anyway, yeah, so I was basically 36 years old, sitting in a cubicle, and decided that I didn't want to just ride it out in an office for the next 30 years, waiting to retire and die is kind of how I view it. So I learned that the Army might take me. So kind of getting back into it. I'm a prior service Marine. I was air crew in CH-53s and plenty of other stuff I could ramble on about, but that's basically the gist of it. And just super passionate about this process and getting back into it, and grateful to be here. And I'm kind of just soaking up the journey, enjoying it. So
Nice. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Obviously, and we've already talked about you're able to answer a lot of questions that my audience have. Obviously, we've been through similar processes, but some of the process is a little different. You're
yeah.
applying to become a warrant on the National Guard side, so you're able to answer a lot of questions that I'm not really able to answer, and I think it would be extremely beneficial to both of our audience, and likewise, since I've already been through flight school, I can help out a lot there. So my first question for you is, what were the steps for getting to flight school from sitting down with the recruiter all the way to getting orders and kind of waiting where you're at right now?
Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
So it's actually a really long time. Like I started in September of 2021. I don't think when did they sign it off? I think it was like a year and a half to get the age waiver through, if I'm not mistaken. September. Wait, hold on. No, it was about a year. It was
Okay.
about a year. And then I enlisted into the Guard. And then I finally, like went to walks, which I'm in now, and got my seat. So, excuse me. So,
Oh, you're
the way it happened for me though was like I kind of called around before I went and talked to a recruiter. I work at a place where there's a lot of vets, and I have a network of people, and I ran into a guy that was basically flies in the Guard. He was like, you could probably still, at least give it a shot. So I called around. I called around to different states, and just even just to even see if they would consider age waivers. So I talked with warrant officers in different states who flat out told me, no, we don't we have no desire to deal with you. And then I finally got in touch, and part of that is like digging for phone numbers and bothering people and all that stuff. So it was very much, if you're like a junior enlisted person, it's not like running it up your chain of command at all. It's like you're going over the top of everybody, straight to the point of contact. So, and I think sometimes people need to hear that who might be younger, that might be considering this. You have to just go do it yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, so then I talked with a recruiter. Luckily for me, that person happened to be a prior Marine aircrew guy. And so we kind of, were able to grunt at each other, and everybody could understand. And so that was good for me and him, because it did take so long. And, I think it probably made it easier for him to deal with me for that year of like, is this signed off yet? Are we, what's the timeline on this? Waiting to hear about getting that stuff back. And then, yeah, so I'm pretty sure that's about it as far as talking to the recruiter. I mean, the process was like, build your packet with the warrant officer, and then submit it. The recruiter is kind of just handling that MEPS and ACFT score and all that stuff that goes into the packet. But from the time I started to the time I got the board was September to January, kind of. So,
Okay.
and then from there, the age waiver got signed off, and then I started warrant officer candidate school about 5 months ago.
Okay.
I think that kind of answered your question. I'm sorry if I missed any of it.
No. That was really good. So, during this process, you had to take the SIFT, get letters of recommendations, do the interview, write a letter of intent, or did you guys have to write a letter of intent, or was that pretty much the board? I feel like if you're doing a board, there would be no purpose for a letter of intent, because you can just explain it to everybody on the board right there in front of them. But
I did have to write a letter.
Okay.
It was part of my packet. I don't know if I don't remember labeling it a letter of intent, but that very well may have been what that was.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. Mine was about a page and a couple paragraphs long. And
Okay.
With all of that stuff, though, I just really tried to focus on my audience, and like I put a video up that is literally just what is it, CAAA, the Army Aviation like Association.
Oh, Quad A.
Yeah, excuse me.
Oh, you're fine.
They threw a video up on YouTube that was just like a conference, and it was a bunch of top Army aviation people, and it was kind of like a snooze fest to watch, but I was able to pick out the information in there that was pertinent to somebody who might be developing a packet. So knowing your audience when you're doing that stuff is very important.
Yeah.
Because you might have a really cool skill, but if you can't articulate it in a way that is going to resonate with the CW5, who only cares about the fact that he wants you to be like a war fighter, right? So like the fact that you flew your Cessna around is kind of almost irrelevant to him.
Yeah.
In a sense. So it's good to just be aware of that stuff.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took the SIFT. I studied, I might even have that stuff laying around here. I studied 2 study guides, and I read the FAA's Rotary Craft Handbook.
Okay.
I read about 80% of that. And
that's impressive. So you did that to prepare yourself for the SIFT, is the Rotary Wing Handbook?
I did. Yeah, I did. I'm ate up with it. I really am. I mean, I was asking a guy on TikTok that I'm friends with, I was asking him for Lakota stuff, and I'm probably not even going to get to really have to worry about that for, another 4 or 5 months here. But I'm interested in it.
No, that mindset is what is going to help you do really well at flight school. Just like always looking forward and always like, what's the next step? What's 2 and 3 steps ahead of me? Because if you have that mindset and you're already preparing, and I was very similar. I didn't read the Rotary Wing Handbook before I took the SIF test, but I studied one book for the SIF test that I bought on Amazon for like $20.
Mhm.
And I studied that. I took the practice. It came with practice tests. I took that a bunch of different times. And this was before me and my wife had kids. We would go to Starbucks and just sit there for like an hour or two. And like, I'd take the test and she would grade my test and like, then ask me the questions that I got wrong. So that really helped me out and set me up for success. But as far as having that mindset, like I was saying about flight school, I was sitting at flight school, not doing anything, in a hold status, getting ready to go into SEER school. And there's a hangar, or there's a store called the Hangar right outside the gate at Fort Novosel. And everybody goes to the hangar to buy all of their study guides and everything. They kind of overcharge for things, but everybody goes there because you can find these niche study guides and stuff that you're not going to find anywhere else.
Yeah.
And
they got the market cornered on that.
What's that?
They got the market cornered on that.
Exactly.
Like, where else are you going to get it? Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to find 5 and 9 flashcards anywhere else.
Yeah.
So I went there and I got the EPs and limits for the 72 before I was even in Common Core. I was sitting and holding, waiting to go into SEER school. It was going to be another like 2 months before I even got the Common Core. And I was studying it. And the problem with that is, and you might understand this a little better because you're coming into this with already an aviation mindset, being crew in the Marines. I didn't really have that background at all. So I'd be reading limitations and stuff for the 72, and I didn't have any context to connect it with. You know what I mean? So sorry for rambling, but that, like I said, that mindset's going to set you up for success. So, and I think a lot of people going to flight school typically are kind of A-type personalities and want to do well. You are going to find 1 or 2 people per class that are going to fail exams and not show up as prepared as they should be. But pretty much the majority of your cohort going through flight school with you is going to have that same mentality, which is good because it makes you compete with one another. You know what I mean?
Yep. Kind of pull each other along.
Exactly. So cool. That answers my questions about your journey with the recruiter.
If I could, I wanted to talk. I think you mentioned getting letters in there.
Yeah. Letters of recommendation. Yeah. How did you get your letters of recommendation?
That's something that I get a lot, and I have answered it to some extent. But if one person can hear this and it helps them, I think it's worth mentioning. That to me is a big deal. Like building a network is a big deal. Because I don't know if the military does a good enough job of talking about it. I just think we're very much keep your head down, do good on like PT and your PME, and you will get rank, and just be humble and all that. And that's great, and it's honorable to be that way. But the way the world works, especially out in the civilian world, is you have to know people, like period. And if you don't have a relationship with somebody, they're never going to care about you. And and so I came from that, and so it was very much a little bit easier for me to kind of approach people and just say, hey, can I get a letter from you? And I ended up getting a letter from our 1-star general in my state, and getting a couple like a CW4, a colonel, and then a couple of my old pilots who are now, since I got all this gray hair, like lieutenant colonels and retired guys. So anyway, that's how I got my letters. But also want to say that like they gave me a sort of a recall roster of potential people that might write you a letter. I called everyone on that list, and I didn't need a letter from them at this point, but I left them a voicemail with like a 30-second pitch about this is my name. This is why I want to do this. And I just wanted to reach out to you and make contact. I genuinely wanted to just tell them that so they would have it. But also there's a second reason. If my name gets circulated before my board or whatever, and they're in the office with the person that's going to assess me during the board, it would be a positive for them to say, oh yeah, that guy left me a voicemail, and
Yeah.
so little stuff like that, I think you can do if it comes from a genuine place. I wasn't trying to do it to, just get an edge or anything, but I think it is a positive thing to kind of have that as some perspective for somebody who's coming into it. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
just go out there and make some phone calls and shake some hands. Call your uncle who's got a cousin who knows a colonel. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And just that most people are going to be receptive and they understand the process. They're going to probably want to write you a letter if you're good to go. So
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I agree with establishing a network as well. And like you said, there's not really an emphasis that I see in the military about creating that network and everything. I think that's something a lot of corporate companies talk about. You know what I mean? You'll see that more prevalent out there. Going back to whenever I was applying to flight school and getting letters of recommendation, I didn't really know a whole lot of people that were pilots in the Army, and I was in med service, so I wasn't really at a base that had a combat aviation brigade at it. I talked to my branch manager, and he was the guy that was kind of managing my packet and advising me on things that I need in order to apply to flight school. And in an offhanded conversation with him, he said, hey, the 67J, and that's the MOS that I am, aeromedical evacuation officer. The 67J consultant to the Surgeon General is the hospital commander at the base you're stationed at, which at this time was Fort Sill. And I said, really? He's like, yeah, his name is Colonel Ortiz. And he said, you should go out of your way and do whatever it takes to get a meeting with that guy and try to get a letter of recommendation from him, because there's really nobody higher than him in the 67J community.
yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I'll try to reach out to his people and try to get a meeting with them. So I did. And when I showed up, I had all of my stuff squared away. I had a timeline on like what I wanted, why I wanted to go to flight school, my ORB, my officer record brief, all of that. I sat down, had a meeting with him. Great guy, super laid back, super easy to talk to, would literally give the shirt off his back to anybody if he needed to. Super good guy. And he was a big part in me going to flight school. And I think also when you meet people in the community that you want to join and you really like them, it kind of validates like you wanting to join that community as well. It's like, man, I want to be that guy one day helping out this young lieutenant, coming to me wanting to apply to flight school. So it's really refreshing to see that. So like you said, with network, I still stay in touch with him. He's retired. He's out of the Army right now, but like, I'll never forget like him going out of his way, taking time out of his day to sit down with me and talk about flight school for an hour long. He didn't have to do that. You know what I mean?
I totally agree. Yep. We're going to pay it forward for sure.
Yep. Do you have any advice for the board interview? And can you talk about that process and what that was like?
Yeah. I mentioned this in a video I put up. So this is very important. So everybody goes through like building the packet, and I mean, you can get on forums. I think there's a Discord now. There's so many resources out there for the packet. And I mean, it's all online too, from the Army. But I mean, I was even at the point thinking like, if I could figure out how to submit these forms that the recruiter submits, I could just like forward them in, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden I would pop up. Like I was thinking about craziness. But anyway, you can build your packet and it should be perfect and you're going to do all that. But like, if you get a shot to go to the interview, which my state does, and we kind of talked about this before. I'm not sure if every state does it. You didn't go to one. But if you get a shot to go to that, all that stuff before, it really kind of means nothing. Like you give them a 25-page document and they're looking at, I don't know how many of these every year. You got to think about your audience again. They're not going to go do a research project on like you or me. They're going to probably skim it and get a good idea who you are, but you have to be very good at articulating yourself to your audience so they can see what's in that packet. So the way for me, the way to do that, and I drew a lot on like my business school experience and going to interviews in the private sector or whatever. I would write down my answers or write down my qualifications and with my audience in mind, the aviation based stuff. And I would rehearse that, whether it be in front of the mirror or with my wife or whatever. And it's awkward and it feels pretty bad to do that. But that's a good thing. Like you should record yourself giving these answers and critique yourself and really put in a ton of prep work for the interview, because that's your shot. You might have a packet that's not as good, but you could go in there and really articulate yourself really well, and they could, then pick you. Or you could have a phenomenal packet that they really like and completely destroy your chances if you go in there and aren't prepared. And the other big thing I'll say is, if you're on the other side of the table and you've been around the block a little bit, which all these guys and gals have, they're going to be able to sniff out the people that haven't prepared. And like me personally, I used to think I could probably get away doing that a little bit, talk my way through it. I'm telling you, they're going to be able to tell immediately who's there, who's rehearsed, who's kind of done their homework and who hasn't. So I put a lot of time and effort into it. And the other thing I'll say is, it's not like I come from the Marines. It's not a military board in a sense. Like when in the Marine Corps, we would go in and position of attention, and the way you would answer questions is like death stare at somebody right in the eye contact and give the answer. And it's very intense and rigid. The board is not like that at all. It's a conversation. It's an interview. Especially if you're a civilian coming in, which I was at the time. So that's what I would say about it. I got my board about 4 months after I kind of started the process. So,
okay. Are these kind of situational based questions? Are they knowledge based?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So, the way it goes is you tell me about yourself. So they don't want to hear that like you were like I was a cart boy at Kroger or whatever. They want to hear, why do you want to be a pilot? Why do you want to be in the Army? Mm-hmm. What are your values? What is stuff that is applicable to that? So have a solid 2 to 4 minute answer about all of those things and all of your background that applies to that when they ask you that. And then they'll get into, what do you want to fly? Like, they're kind of asking, have you done a little research? Do you know the platforms? Do you know what our state has? What's your leadership type? Give us an example of how you use that in your past. And like they also, I think they asked about the Army values or Army types of leadership or whatever.
Okay.
That type of stuff was in there. It was a small amount, but
Yeah.
it was there. It has been a little bit now, but so there is some like knowledge Army specific that should know, but it was majority more interview type questions. So make sure you know your strengths and weaknesses, and go online and look up what interview questions are and have answers for those that apply to your audience.
Okay. Yeah, I see. So the knowledge-based questions that they would ask you were kind of like surface level, like the Army values, maybe the warrior ethos or something like that.
Very much so. It was not in depth at all.
Yeah. What's the max effective range of a 50 cal?
No, that's what I was kind of trying to get
Yeah.
talking to the Marine Corps board. It was not like that.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
And then I think that's a great point that you brought up about doing your research on your state, because I think a lot of these boards are state-based. I think because the state probably has time to screen their candidates a little better. The active duty, hey, we have X amount of slots, apply, we'll cut off this and we'll read this. You know what I mean? I don't know. I've never been behind the curtain, so to say, but I'm assuming for active duty, it's probably similar to that, but I think the National Guard probably takes a little more time to screen out their candidates a little better, which is probably why they have the board. And for your state, like you said, we were talking the other day and you said you guys don't have 47. So if you go to that board and you're like, I want to fly 47s,
yeah,
and they're like, well, we don't even have 47 in the state. That's the kind of research you probably want to do to see the platforms available to you in that state.
I mean, another question I had was, would you be willing to drill out of, the different locations? If your answer to that is no, that's going to hurt your chances. They ask you, hey, we deploy, we mobilize. Are you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. My bags are packed. Now, am I telling that to my wife?
Of course not.
But that's like an unspoken thing, right? That everybody knows, that your family and all that, but you got to go in there and go for it. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Well, that's really good for the audience to hear. I get that question a lot, is about the interviews. So thank you for answering that.
That's my pleasure.
As far as flight school, so do you have any questions that you have for yourself on flight school and the process once you arrive to Fort Rucker or Fort Novosel now?
Yeah, I have tons. So I'm in a state walks right now, and that'll be wrapping up here very soon. So I'll pin, and then I got a date. I guess, my first question is like, when you checked in, what was that check-in process like? Is it like super formal? Is there a lot of direction, or is it just like, hey, welcome, go figure it out?
That's a great question. It wasn't on the enlisted side, and I didn't brief this in my introduction, but I was former an 11 Bravo in the National Guard, infantry. Okay. So I've been to basic training, and when you show up for basic training, they hold your hand. Everything is very streamlined and micromanaged. There is a process. You never know. There's never a second where you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because you have a drill sergeant like barking orders at you, like you will be in this uniform at this location at this time, ready to go. It's not like that. I think the reason why is you're a warrant officer candidate, and well, in your case, since you're doing walks, a warrant officer when you show up. So your next step will be WOBIC. Whenever I showed up at Fort Novosel, I was a captain. So the expectation, I think, is you know you have the initiative to go find the information and to show up and be prepared.
Yeah.
I think that's the expectation. It's not as micromanaged as you're used to if you're coming from the enlisted side. For me, I checked into what's called Delta Company. That's the commissioned officer company. They manage the commissioned officers. For you, you'll check into Bravo Company. They manage the warrant officers.
Okay.
So you have your orders, and this is going off of memory. So I some of this has kind of faded to the black a little bit, but I checked into Delta Company, and they gave me basically a checklist. Hey, you got to go to these locations, check
Sure.
in with these organizations. You go to the central office on post, and you basically do that checklist and check in, and you're in processing. You'll do PT Monday through Friday, even on hold. That's the crappiest part about being on hold is you actually have to do PT and be at that formation every morning. When you're in a course, you do whatever the course cadre tell you to do. And in Common Core, you don't do PT. In SEER school, you don't do PT, obviously, because you're doing SEER school stuff. You don't need to. So when you're on hold, you're doing PT, you're going to your appointments, you're doing your in-processing stuff. You do that checklist, and basically the next big milestone that you're going to do is you're going to get the Fort Novacell flight physical. So you've already done a flight physical where you're at right now. You've already been signed off by the people at Novacell, but once you get there, you have to redo a flight physical. I don't know why they do it that way. It made sense to me that this flight physical that I had to get coming here would take me through, but that's not the case. You have to get another one once you get there. Once you get that.
Did you see people get hemmed up by that? Did you lose anybody?
Actually, we did, man. And that's really unfortunate because I know how this process is. And it's not easy to get to Fort Novacell. You jump through a lot of hoops, especially in your situation where you have to, maybe get a waiver or something like that. I was in that boat. I didn't have to get an age waiver, but I did have to get a medical waiver for one issue. So you've already been, stressing about, am I going to get this waiver? Am I going to get that? And then you have to go kind of relive that. But I didn't think once you've already made it to Novacell, I don't really think it's as intense as the one you got to get there.
Okay.
They're not going off of different standards or anything, but you already have waivers and stuff. So you don't, if you had to get a waiver getting there, they're not going to make you redo the waiver or anything like that. But the guys to answer your question, the guys that I saw that got dropped through the course or had to wait longer to redo their flight physical or something. One guy in particular was on hold for a long time for hearing. He failed his hearing test. And he's like, he's actually a former Marine as well. And he is like, I don't get it. Like, I passed the hearing test coming here, and for whatever reason, I didn't pass the one here. And he actually got put on hold for a while, but whenever I was graduating, he was in Common Core. So he stayed on hold for a little bit, and whatever waiver he had to get, he got it. Thankfully, I think the state, because he was National Guard as well, I think his state basically signed off on him. Obviously, I don't know all of the details of his story, but he had to wait for a while on that. There was like one or two other people that I think got dropped, but it does happen, but it's not super common.
Okay.
I'll say that. So yeah, whenever I heard that, because I was on hold and he's like, I was talking to him, we were talking a little bit, and he's like, yeah, I'm on hold. I didn't make it through the flight physical. And I started stressing a little bit. I'm like, shit, like, it's like that again. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so, yeah. So it's like,
Yeah.
I got my family here. I moved in and everything. And like, now I got to go through this. So, but that's your first milestone. You do your in-processing stuff, and you got to get your flight physical.
Okay.
I got mine within about I'd say a week or two of arriving there. And then once you get your flight physical, you can move on with the next process. Mine was SEER school. I had to knock out, I didn't have to do what's called BOLIC, which is the warrant officer version of that is WOBIC.
Yeah.
I didn't have to redo that. I'd already been to med service BOLIC, so that counted for the BOLIC that I would have had to do going there. So I got to go straight to SEER school. And you'll have to do WOBIC and then go to SEER school. But the flight physical is your first like milestone once you arrive there.
What were your, mentally, SEER school, you're hopping right into it after the physical. Like obviously everybody knows it's a gut check, and I got my wings in the Marine Corps by cross training once I was in the fleet. All the crew chiefs, they got like all that training. They went to SEER school. I was friends with a lot of those guys. They told me about their experience. They didn't tell me anything that, like they weren't supposed to tell me, but the overarching details. Mentally though, how were you going in? How was your mindset throughout it? And then on the back end as well, like, was it just a giant relief, or did it stick with you? Was it motivational? Did it drain?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to prepare for SEER school, as you know, it's a lot of the stuff that you learn in the course is classified for a good reason. Obviously, like we don't want to give the enemy basically the playbook of how we're gonna survive, evade, and resist and escape.
Absolutely.
But in preparing for flight school, I read a lot of POW books to kind of get myself in the mindset, because SEER school, the curriculum is based off of what's been done before, right? If it worked for Mike Durant, if it worked for all of the POWs before, obviously, like they get a debrief from those guys once they get out, and they're like, hey, this worked for him, this didn't work for him. So I read a lot of those POW books. The one that I read Mike Durant's book. I think In the Company of Heroes was the one that I read. And then the other book. Okay, that's a good one. And then the other book that I read was, I think, 5 Years a Prisoner or something. It's an older book. It's from Vietnam, but it's about a Green Beret who gets captured and he actually escapes. But yeah, and I mean, that kind of gets you into the mindset of kind of some of the stuff that you're going to learn there. And then from a physical standpoint, I would say having good endurance helps out there. So running helped me out, although I wouldn't go like do marathon training or anything like that. I just would show up in shape. You know what I mean? And a question I get a lot is like, hey, can I just eat whatever I want? I'm going to lose all the weight anyways. I don't think that's a good strategy. Obviously, everybody's going to lose weight at SEER school. But I wouldn't go, eat 12 donuts every single morning and fried chicken every single night. I would have a nutritious diet. You want to show up there in good health. And you're going to do a lot of walking, a good bit of running. And as long as you're kind of focusing your training on endurance, there's really not a whole lot of situations where you're going to have to just be powerful and a brute at SEER school. It's more of an endurance thing. That's what I would say to focus your training on going there. And then as far as after leaving SEER school, it didn't really stick with me. I mean, going through SEER school, you see some really crazy stuff and you're told some really crazy stuff that is kind of like, man, I don't know how these guys do this every single day and just go home and eat dinner with their family. But at the same time, you understand what school you're going to. You know what I mean? So nothing really stuck with me after SEER school other than what I learned was really good. I thought they have it down to a science on the strategies that they teach you, and they're really effective. And I thought at the end of SEER school, the way that it ends and everything, it's really inspiring and it's really cool.
I love that.
Um,
I love that.
yeah, it is inspiring at the end. It's a shitty school. Like while you're there, it sucks. But at the end, you're like, man, this is really cool how they did this. So, yeah,
That's great.
Yep.
Not to equate the two, but I feel the same way about walks. Like in all these TRADOC schools, but there are things that they know how to do that a week later you're like, oh, I see why that's happening, and I'm better for it, and so on. But
and then here's some advice I'll also touch on too. When you're in SEER school and you're in a certain phase of the SEER school, like when you're in the camp, you're gonna when people are tired and people are hungry and you're doing all kind of stuff, running around here, running around there, the worst of some people are going to come out. My advice would be like, understand that take things serious, but not so serious. Have the lens of knowing and understanding what's in the game. And the important thing is we're all in this together. Like if you're bickering and fighting with one another, like that is not what you want to do at all. You want to be a team. You know what I mean? So you'll see some people go there and like argue with one another because this guy's not trying hard or whatever. Like I would say to whatever you do, don't fall into it. You guys are the best assets you have in SEER school is together as a team. So that's one thing I'll say.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Hey, sorry about that.
Oh, you're good, man.
We were on SEER school. You were talking about, not bickering. Each other are the best assets that we have.
Yep. So once you get out of SEER school, obviously, you are finally on the way to what you go to flight school for. What everybody wants to do is finally fly the damn aircraft. So, Common Core, it's honestly a lot of fun, but it's also really stressful, especially with your personality. You always want to do the best. I was the same way. So when you get into Common Core, you're going to do, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. I think it's 2 weeks of ground school. So the first 2 weeks of Common Core, you're not even going to touch an aircraft. You're going to learn how to pre-flight. You're going to learn how to just basic airport operation stuff, how to read what taxiway you're on, typical signs, runway alignment, the numbers on the runways, what a traffic pattern is, which I don't think they place a very good emphasis on, but maybe they do. And I was just like so overwhelmed with all of the information that I didn't pay attention to it at the time. And the other thing is practicing your run up. So you're going to go to these things called cockpit trainers, or CPTs for short, and you'll get issued what's called an IP. He's not the IP that's going to be training you through P1. This IP doesn't even fly, which whenever they assigned me this IP, I thought like, oh, this is my IP. He's going to be the guy showing me how to fly the aircraft. So, but these guys in the cockpit trainers are not the IPs you're going to get on the flight line.
Okay.
So, not that that matters or anything, but my mindset is like, oh man, I can't, appear slow like I don't know what I'm doing, because this guy's going to think I'm an idiot right off the bat. This is not the guy that you're going to be going to flight line and flying with every single day. This guy is there to basically teach you how to do a run up in the 72, the Eurocopter, or the Army, what the Army calls the Lakota. You're going to learn how to start it up and shut it down. And the Lakota is a very simple, straightforward helicopter. The checklist at first for the startup is going to seem a little overwhelming, but it's literally step by step. Like, you literally read the step and you do the step. For the Black Hawk, I can speak for that. I don't know about any of the other airframes, but I'm sure it's similar. The Black Hawk run up is a lot more detailed and complex. Like a lot of the things in the checklist, it's called a detailed procedure. So for instance, in the Black Hawk, when you're doing run up, you have circuit breakers and switches check. That is a detailed procedure. So it doesn't teach you every single thing in that step. There's a bunch of sub steps that you have to do off of memory.
Okay.
And you have to memorize the warnings, cautions, and notes, but I don't want to get too much into the advanced airframe portion. What I'm trying to say is the Lakota is like, you don't have to really memorize everything. You will get like a little booklet and you just do whatever that booklet says. It's very easy and you'll get faster and faster and faster and faster at it. Here's some good advice too. So you have the cockpit trainer that you go to learn run-ups every single day, but in the aviation library, I forget what it's called. I think it's called the aviation library. It's on Fort Novosel. You can actually go there and they have cockpit trainers. So if you want to double tap your run-ups and get really good and proficient at, you can go to your CPT trainer all day or with your IP and do 1 or 2 run-ups. And then if you have the time after that, you can go to this library and use the cockpit trainer there with you and your stick buddy. And you can do as many run-ups as you want. So that's one thing I will say. Fort Novosel has a lot of good resources that if you have the initiative to take the time to go to that library and do run-ups, you can get really good at run-ups before you even go to the flight line.
It seems like that base, for all the years they've been doing it, is just rock solid for Army aviation. Like everyone I talk to is like, I loved my time there. My family enjoyed their time there. Everybody I talked to.
I would agree 100%. And they have it down to a science. If you have the initiative and the motivation, it doesn't matter how hard flying a helicopter is, you're going to know how to fly a helicopter by the time you leave there. All it takes is initiative and motivation. There are going to be 1 or 2 people per class. You'll see it there that are always kind of lagging behind. And it's because like, if they suck at run up, I guarantee you they're not going and taking that 1 extra hour a day to go to that library. And I did too. My IP, like whenever I got the flight line, he's like, hey, you need to be faster on run up. I want you to go to the aviation library. And I'd go there an hour every single day whenever I first got into Common Core and do that run up, and you get faster. Like I said, if you have the initiative and motivation of like, this is my skill, this is what I do, this is my home now.
Yeah. And
you can do really well there. But going into more on Common Core, so you'll do that ground school for about 2 weeks, and then you do your nickel ride, which is your first flight in a helicopter, or the Lakota. And your first flight, you'll get up to cruise flight and he'll let you take the controls. The way my IP did it was like, okay, you have the pedals, and it's like, see what the pedals do. He's like, and then he's like, okay, I have the pedals in the collective, you have the cyclic. And he gives you a feel, and he kind of like slowly introduces that. And then the first thing you're going to try to learn how to do is hover. That'll take you a little minute to learn, or you might be high speed and immediately know how to hover an aircraft. But that took me a few days to learn. And then for your P1 check ride, it's just all traffic patterns, all normal approaches, all traffic patterns. So that's the first thing you'll learn in P1, and then you go to P2 and it's basically all traffic patterns still, but you do like an auto rotation and a run on landing.
So it's super. This is all. I love it. When you went from the simulator to actually flying, can you describe sort of the difference in feel and, give a percentage or
yeah,
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you got the cockpit trainer that simulates the run up, but then you also have the simulator, if that makes sense. So the cockpit trainer doesn't actually like simulate flight. It just simulates the aircraft and the run up. For the simulator for the Lakota, you go to a different building that's actually off post. It's close to post, but it's off post. And that simulator is extremely realistic. It feels like you're really flying a helicopter. The only thing is, like, if you crash this one, you can just hit restart. You know what I mean? But you'll find, I think the aircraft is easier to fly than the simulator, believe it or not. Okay. And my theory on this is just how I feel. I think the simulator struggles with simulating the actual weight of the aircraft. So one of the hardest things to do in the simulator is hover, because it feels like you're picking up a tin can in the simulator.
Yeah.
But when you pick up a helicopter off of the ground in real life, like you're really flying it, you can actually feel as you're pulling in that collective that you're pulling up weight off of the ground. I don't know what the Lakota weighs. I think it's like 4,000 pounds or something. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've flown one, but you can feel like you're picking up a 4,000 pound helicopter off of the ground. And so when you put in a little right cyclic or a little too much left cyclic when you're hovering, the response of that aircraft takes a little bit in reality, to where in the simulator, it immediately like goes way the hell over here or way the hell. So I think like I said, my theory is I don't think it simulates the weight very good. But as far as cruise flight, practicing instruments and practicing just your cruise flight and traffic pattern, I think it's pretty good. Okay. But going from the simulator to flying the actual aircraft, it's awesome, man. Like it's really cool. You're like, holy crap, I'm flying a helicopter. This is all of my like 1 year or 2 years of applying to this program. I'm finally doing what it's a really cool feeling. That's and then awesome. When you get to P2 and you actually start doing really good at flying, really good compared to like what you were doing, it's really cool to like do your first run on landing without any assistance from the IP. Like that feels really cool. So yeah,
I love that. I'd like to talk about your sort of mentality. I asked about that for the SEER school. During flight school, is time dragging by? Are you did you get any low moments in there that you had to deal with, and just anything like that, or anything that stuck out to you that you came away with that you thought I had no idea that this was going to occur, or that I would encounter this, or that this would be this challenging?
Yeah. So, I think looking back on it now, time flew by so fast in flight school. I mean, and I think it's because you're so focused on every single day. It just makes the time go by really fast. During P1, I would say was the most challenging part of flight school, because you're learning how to fly a helicopter and everything is so new to you. And when you sit down with your IP at Flightline and you do table talk, you never feel like you're up to his standards on where you need to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course you're not going to feel that way because these guys have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. You know what I mean? So P1 was a challenge. I felt like every time I left Flightline, I was like, I need to go home and study my ass off tonight. And I felt like that every single day. And it's like, I know whenever I was in college, it's like, you know, you study for an hour and like you can ace the test. It did not feel like that in flight school. It felt like if I studied an hour, I need to tack on 3 more hours to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even sometimes then it never felt good enough. And I think a part of that is because the IP always knows how to make you feel like you're not as prepared as you can be. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff that you have to memorize, and it's all really important stuff. So, yeah, like you feel like you're constantly playing catch up, especially in P1. It gets easier in P2 because now, like, okay, I know the fundamentals of flying. I know I can fly this helicopter around this traffic pattern. Now I need to focus on the ATM standards for run on and auto rotation, and I need to memorize what's called for the Lakota, the FLI chart, or the first limit indicator. There's this big, massive chart, and I know when you get there and you start memorizing, you're gonna be like, "This is what he was talking about." But you memorizing what every single symbol means and what your they call it something else for the Lakota, but for the Black Hawk, it's the same thing. It's the turbine gas temperature, the TGT, like what all of those parameters for those limit indicators, what that means, and how many seconds can you be there, or how many minutes are you allowed to be there. You're constantly trying to commit that stuff to memory. So when your IP like notices you and he checks you on that, and if you don't rattle that off or you get a number wrong, he's like, okay, I can unsat you for that. That's something you need to, have that committed to memory. So like I said, going back to your question, you constantly feel like you're playing catch up to get to where you need to be. And there's just so much to memorize. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess, I mean, I have plenty of other stuff I'd like to kind of get in the weeds on, but I think right now for me, it still feels like it's a ways off.
Yeah, for sure.
And for the sake of time, I don't want to, just ramble. But when I guess switching gears, like when you got your wings, what was that like? And then can we talk about now in your unit, what, day-to-day life? I'm curious how your annual went yesterday or whatever, forgive me on the terminology, but just stuff like that.
So great questions. And I agree. We'll if you're okay with this, we'll end with this.
Okay.
I think we've given the audience some pretty good context, but whenever I got my wings, it was freaking awesome. There's really, I think that was like up to this point, I think that was like the pinnacle of my career. Obviously you'll go to your unit, you'll get out of progression, but you're fighting to get PC next, pilot in command next. But getting those wings and you're like, I'm a full-fledged aviator. Like I'm really a pilot now. You know what I mean? That was a really cool moment. And then going to your unit, the first thing you're going to do is progression. So you're going to show up to your unit, your commander and your SP, your senior pilot, is going to most likely designate you RL3, which is readiness level 3 for pilots, basically meaning like you can only fly with an IP. That's all you can fly with. And there are things that you have to do in progression to get to the next readiness level, which is RL2. So you do those base tasks in your advanced airframe with your IP. When you're up to those standards of where they need you to be, they sign you off and you're now RL level 2. And then RL level 2, you're doing your tactical. You've moved away from the base task stuff, like landing at a staging field or an airport, like your very basic task, and you're now doing tactical stuff like terrain flight, combat maneuver flight, AMS, more of the advanced stuff. Oh, and multi-ship is one of them. And then for me, since I'm medevac, we got to do hoist. they sign you off from that. And then once you're signed off from that, you're now RL1 and you can fly with any pilot in command. And then, like I said, from then on, you're trying to become a pilot in command. And you get that basically, there's these things called pilot in command boards, PC boards, and all of the PCs in the unit basically come together and they discuss their PIs. And they'll literally go line by line and they'll be like, hey, where's Captain Rushing at? And they'll be like, hey, he needs to work on this. He sucks at this. He needs to do this better. And then we'll consider him for PC.
Okay.
And then you get those comments. You'll get a back brief from the commander. On the warrant side, I think the SP does the back brief for you guys. It doesn't really matter who gives you the back brief. The thing is, ideally, you should have some things that you need to work on going forward to prepare for the next board. And those boards, some units are better about it. My unit is honestly, they don't do the best job about it. I feel like PC boards here are kind of randomly. Like we went like 6 months without having one and we finally had another one. And I think our next one's in 3 months. So, yeah, I mean, after you're out of progression, you're gunning to make that PC status. So, and then for warrants, you guys will eventually track. So for the tracks, you have safety, which obviously, you know, aviation safety. I don't have to really explain that one too much. And then you have the AMSO, which is the Air Mission Survivability Officer. That guy basically at the unit, he is analyzing enemy threats. Like if you go on a deployment or something and he's like, okay, the enemy has these capabilities. These are the things that we can do to fly to basically not get shot down. That's what that guy focuses on. He does some more things, but in the most brief summary I can give, that's what he does. And then you have instructor pilot, IP. You'll become very familiar with what those guys do. And then maintenance test pilot is the fourth one. And maintenance test pilot is basically the guy who manages the unit maintenance program. And he is basically the last authority to sign off an aircraft and say, this is airworthy. So,
yeah.
But yeah, once you make PC, you'll be, as a warrant, you'll be going after that track and what you want to track and figuring out what you want to track. So pretty cool.
That makes sense with the whole technical field.
Yeah. But hopefully I was able to give you some good context. I think you did a really good job of giving my audience and answering a lot of questions that a lot of people have. So I look forward to watching you do really well in flight school. I have no doubt you're going to do pretty damn good. And then hopefully we could do something like this again. And you can basically inform the audience on like some things that have changed. Obviously that'll be much further down the road, but I think you'll give some good insight later on.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm just trying to soak it up. I told myself from the jump that if I was going to do this, I mean, 10-year ADSO, I'm not going to worry about the destination as much as possible. So just trying to enjoy the ride here. Yeah,
man, you'll enjoy it. Flight school is a lot of fun. Looking back on it, it's a great experience. And it's not always super stressful. Like I said, I think P1 is the most stressful phase. Once you get out of that and you're flying, you're still going to feel like you need to study all the time, but like it's not as heavy as P1. And that was just my experience. Maybe that, you know, P2 or BWS will be more stressful to you, but from my experience, I remember feeling the most overwhelmed in P1. So,
makes sense.
All right, man. Well, I think we got some good content. I guess we'll end it here, and I'll stay in touch with you on getting the link to the video.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for reaching out initially. That's, you know, a huge deal. So I'm grateful to you for that. Yeah, I'll, you know, send everything I possibly can. I absolutely make sure you get access and whatever else, man. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully doing this in the near future when the next big checkpoint hits or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and as for you, man, like you have my cell phone number. If when you get into flight school and you start doing anything, man, like call me. I'm always available to you. I'll answer any questions I can.
That's beautiful, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem, Mike. Well, we'll end it here, man. Like I said, you have my number. Just text me the link or whatever, and then we'll talk again whenever.
I'll do it. I did. I not for the interview or anything, but how did your
Oh yeah, I didn't even. You asked me about that, and I didn't even go into it. It went really good.
Good.
It did. It went really good. The IP. It was funny because the IP I did my A part with actually progressed me whenever I first showed up to the unit, and he was like, not to brag on. It sounds like I'm bragging on myself, but this is what
yeah.
He was like, this is the biggest improvement I've ever seen from any body I've ever progressed from start to finish, like where you're at now. And he was like, and I kind of was like thinking, I was like, well, maybe I was just really shitty in progression. And he was like, I am not saying you were bad in progression at all. You were definitely fine. He was like, it's just really cool to see, like, have been with somebody from flight school when they showed up to the unit, and then seeing, because he hasn't flown with me since progression, and to seeing where you are now, he was like, it's really cool to see. And I think, I don't know if you probably haven't even thought of what you want to track, but I think that would be really cool about being an IP, is like teaching aviation and watching those pilots grow once you teach them, you know. And I think that would be extremely rewarding. I know if I could track, that's what I would track.
I would like to think that's what I would do, but I mean, I just and like, no offense to safety, it's serious business, but like, you know, yeah.
I know what you're saying. IP or MTP is the way to go. MTPs are, they know systems, and you need MTPs, need really good MTPs. I love my MTP. But I think IP gets all the flight time, and they have a lot of control. Like, commanders are commanders, but that is one thing about aviation that is very unique. It's like the warrant, especially the senior pilot, he holds a lot of power. I mean, if he wants to RL3 the commander, he can. You know what I mean? Full PC orders, like, those guys hold a lot of power, and it's a very unique thing about aviation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's funny.
I don't want to hold you up too long. I know you got a family. And,
Same.
Yeah. All right, man. Good talking to you, Mike.
That was a pleasure. Be well.
See you, man.
See ya.